Hi Ozoria. How are you? I'm very excited to see you and hear your story.
Hello, Lisa. I can't wait to tell you the story. Please join me inside. Let me tell you a tale of mystery, adventure, romance and action. Soblar, Concealed Revelations Volume 1. Written by A. E. Pusker.
Is that the name of the story? It sounds unique and interesting. I am ready to hear it. What is it about?
Well, Soblar can be best described as a mixed fiction saga. This story carries elements of a science fiction, a fantasy, a love story, a political thriller, and an international crime drama. They are all explored through the gaze of a philosophical observation. It is a story which gyrates around the never-ending battle of good versus evil, and it is reflected from the different perspectives of several characters who are bound together by destiny in surviving a possible end of the universe. The scenario will be brought upon them by the legions of the Lord, an evil satanic cult that is bent on eradicating mankind and bringing darkness into our world. In order to achieve their goals, the legions of the Lord will make use of dark powers, demonic creatures, and strange sorcery. However, there are two anonymous organizations standing in the way of the diabolical omen and preventing the full success of their plot, which has fluctuated from the distant past and into our times. One of them is known as WAL, W-A-L-L, the World's Alliance, Last Line, and the other is a secret sect, self-appointed as The Answer. Although WAL and The Answer have been fighting the same evil for a very long time, they seem to be oblivious to their shared duties. WAL implements the usage of technologically advanced military weapons in their battle against their evil adversary, whereas The Answer applies the help of supernatural magic and witchcraft to fight them, at times conflicted by their differences in, let us say, style and substance. WAL and The Answer find themselves involved in conflicts, accidentally combating each other, possibly unaware that they have the same goals and the same foe to defeat. In light of this misfortune, certain elements belonging to factions from the legions of the Lord take unknown advantage of the given opportunity and create mischief all around us. Malevolent creatures are let loose amongst men. Sightings of mysterious things, as well as inexplicable events happening all around the world. In the midst of the unfortunate misunderstandings and the distracting chaos created by those who are supposed to be secretly protecting us. But then, someone shows up out of nowhere, an individual who will have to play a pivotal and consequential role in this war between good and evil. The problem was that this individual has yet to figure out which side of the equation he belongs to, the good guys or the bad guys. Therefore, in order to find the answer to his daunting question, he decided to do the only thing he deemed necessary. He realizes that, in order to understand his destiny, he needs to learn why is it impending for the legions of the Lord to destroy the world of man, and why are those protecting mankind assuming this responsibility. To achieve this, he will have to plunge himself into a place he did not fully understand, and study the source of the problem itself. The problem as it happens to be is us, the world of man, which he will become more conscious of by going on a pilgrimage all around the world. What do you think about the plot?
Okay. I'm liking it so far. Continue.
Well, during this time of search and self-observation, and his interactions with people from all ethnicities and all walks of life, rumors began circulating about him, about what people experienced with him, how he changed their lives, or fractured their realities. And so, people gave him nicknames. Some called him the Prophet, others knew him as the Vigilante, and others addressed him as the Teacher.
Ozoria, all of it sounds like a very complex and lengthy plot. Is this all in one book?
No, Lisa. This entire saga consists of 8 books. Book number 1 is called Concealed Revelations. Book number 2 is called Path of the Wicked. Book number 3 is called The Dark Priest. Book number 4 is called The Four Hakabas. Book number 5 is called Prelude to Shadows. Book number 6 is called Origins of the Kind. Book number 7 is called Celestial Grievance. And book number 8 is called Light.
8 books. Ozoria. My goodness. This is a very epic story.
Correct, Lisa. This was what the authors intended when they began writing the story nearly 20 years ago. Okay. So, Concealed Revelations. This particular book has 3 volumes. And it will be the book we will be exploring today. It is also available on Amazon.com. And Volume 2 will be released soon.
I see.
Yes. This book will introduce you to a man, scarred, both physically and mentally, as he tries to find the meaning of his existence. A young woman, learning how to utilize newfound powers, which she had not been aware of. And a little girl, haunted by an unknown evil.
Okay, Ozoria. It all sounds fascinating. I can't wait to hear the rest of it.
Let's go inside and I'll tell you how Volume 1 of Concealed Revelations starts. Let us begin.
Very well. Let me hear it.
Okay. But, allow me to get into character first. Ready? Here it goes. Chapter 1. Uninformed Casualties. Elsewhere in the world, an automatic door, dramatically, slides open to the left. I want you to bring me more morphine and additional sheets. Bring the disposable ones as well. We need them all. Right now. A nurse was heard saying as she and another nurse gathered together some of the kits they needed, from a very narrow and sleek designed supply room. They both wore white biohazard suits, with special oxygen masks over their faces. It did not take them long to exit the supply room onto a chaotic scene. It was the hallway of an advanced military vessel, where armed soldiers, wearing advanced tactical, black military gear, could be seen rushing in every direction. Nurse Smith, as indicated by the rectangular tag over the upper left side of her uniform, was a woman in her early 30s, with a strong shape. Her blue eyes could be seen through the lenses of her oxygen mask, and her dark hair was loose and wavy. She walked into one of the rooms where there were several doctors and other nurses attending to a man who appeared to be in critical condition. He had been acting irrational after awaking from a coma earlier in that hour, and his body has been rejecting all of the medication he had been given till that moment. The doctors and the additional nurses were dressed in the same biohazard suit that Nurse Smith was wearing, but theirs were gray, with 4 red stripes on the top of the left shoulder, indicating a higher rank. Nurse Smith stood where she was, just being a witness to what was happening to that man.
Wait. When is this happening? Is it in the future or?
The timeline in the story begins in the early 90s, and as you read along, it will be explained as the different plots unfold. But allow me to continue with your introduction into this fascinating world.
Perfect. Continue.
Okay. Hours later, the situation seemed to have gotten partially under control. Nurse Smith walked back into the same room. She was now wearing her regular uniform, which consisted on plain white scrubs. Her hair was tied up into a neat bun, and this time, when she went to look at the patient, he was quietly sleeping. The light in the room was very low, and the illumination of the devices connected to the man was dimmed as well. She looked at him for a moment, seeing that he was missing his right leg, his right arm, and he was also burned over most portions of what was left of his body. There was sadness in her gaze as she stared at him. She calmly went ahead to change his IV fluid bag. He appeared to be a man in his mid to late 20s, with fair skin darkened by the sun, curly dark hair that grew past his ears, and thick eyebrows that were partially burned. Burn marks were also visible from under his neck, reaching till the top left side of his face. Nurse Smith stared in silence. She thought about how different and challenging his life is going to be after this times. Poor soul, she said to herself, speaking in a quiet tone of voice, while cleaning the man's wounds and changing the bandages around his burned skin.
Wow, Ozoria. This is only the beginning of the story. But it already sounds very intense.
Oh no, Lisa. Just wait. It's going to get much better. Continue listening.
Okay. I am.
Very well then. Allow me to get back into character. As I was saying, when Nurse Smith was done changing the patient's bandages, she took a deep breath, and then gently tapped the man's left arm in a reassuring manner. It was one of the few places he was not wounded. She did that before turning around to leave the room. She was startled when she saw there were two men there, dressed in dark blue suits, seated behind her, in the shadows on the right side of the door. Poor soul. Indeed, one of the men whispered. Nurse Smith walked out of the room without saying anything to them. The next day, Nurse Smith was going to begin her usual rounds, along with Nurse Roach. As they entered the room where the man with the badly burned body was being kept, she saw that he was awake and was accompanied by a doctor and the same two men she had seen the night before. Nurse Smith, you may go now and assist in the care of the other, the doctor instructed her. She hesitated for a moment, but she then took a step back and allowed the sliding door to close automatically in front of her face. She stared at the door while searching through something in her mind. She then went ahead to the next room with Nurse Roach, who had been standing near her, waiting for her to come alone. In the meantime, inside the room. Now, Mr. Douglas, I will leave you with these men, and they will do everything in their power to help you. Please cooperate with them, the doctor said to the burned patient. Don't worry, you will be fine. The doctor then excused himself and only the other two men remained with Douglas. One of the men made sure the door was completely locked by scanning a solid black wristband over a keypad by the middle right side of the door. He then spoke an order into the wristband for the door to remain locked. As he came back closer to the bed, the other man sat in a chair by the side of Douglas's head and pulled out a very thin small recording device. He placed it near Douglas's pillow in an inconspicuous manner. Clarence Douglas. Please confirm that this is your name, the man by the other side of the bed asked while researching information about the patient in the bed through the lenses of the thin-framed glasses he was wearing. Yes, Clarence replied. His voice sounded very fragile and he was still under the effects of the medication he had been given, but his presence of mind was enough to understand and answer questions. Where are you? Clarence asked the man by the side of his pillow. At this moment, that is not important, Mr. Douglas. What is important is your recollection of the events which brought you to this place and the condition in which you find yourself in right now, the man replied. He looked at his partner standing at the other side of the bed. He then looked again at Clarence and got closer to him without taking his eyes away from his face. God, what has happened to me? Clarence asked while gazing at himself in the hospital bed. Mr. Douglas, you are one of the few survivors, the man standing by the left side of the bed answered. Survivors? Clarence asked slowly. Do you remember what happened to you? Or what caused all of this damage to your body? Do you remember anything at all? His tone of voice was becoming demanding and impatient. Stop, please! Clarence cried out for a moment while the two men observed in silence. He looked at them and he saw no mercy or compassion on their faces, only determination. After a moment, Clarence finally pulled himself together and asked the man to his left for a glass of water. The man looked at his partner and his partner agreed. Clarence used his left hand with the help of the man in glasses to drink from a plastic cup. He took several sips and afterward reclined himself back while looking at the ceiling. Who am I talking to? Clarence finally asked. That is not important at the moment, the man in glasses replied. What are your names? You know my name, and you seem to know who I am. I don't know anything about you. I need to know who I am talking to, Clarence insisted. The men looked at each other. You may call me Mr. Burton, and the gentleman over there is Mr. Vaughn, the man near Clarence replied. As Clarence began to cough again, Burton gave him more water. Burton then let out a soft sigh as he went on to carefully place his glasses inside his jacket pocket. Mr. Douglas, Vaughn said, we need you to tell us everything you can. It is very important for our investigation to figure out how and when things began to get so out of control that the consequences of what exactly took place brought us all to this very point. Vaughn was carefully measuring his words while Burton placed the cup back on the table near the bed. Clarence aided him to think and search in his mind. He again coughed momentarily as tears were streaming down from his eyes. He then closed his eyes momentarily, attempting to compose himself. There were demons. Clarence began speaking. hesitantly. What? Speak louder. What did you say? Burton asked Clarence. I saw demons, Clarence again said, now looking at both men in the eyes as he spoke to them, while still searching within his own mind to sift through all the chaotic images he was beginning to recall. Please, Mr. Douglas, keep talking, Vaughn said. I was never supposed to be at that place, Clarence continued, speaking while staring down at what was left of his body. A lock of luck, or perhaps fate, had brought me there. I felt as if it was going to be the start of a new beginning for me, and it turned out to be nearly my end. Mr. Douglas, tell us about those demons you believe you saw. How did they look? What did they do? Burton asked. Clarence looked at him for an instant. Then, he looked at himself and stared at the place where his right leg should have been. He then closed his eyes tightly. The demons, they moved in the air, Clarence said. First, there was the one who wanted to capture the woman. It seemed to me like he had been taunting her to the point of driving her mad. Then, others showed up. I am not sure whether one of them wanted to protect her or kill her. Clarence paused momentarily, shaking his head from side to side. Please, Mr. Douglas, go on, Vaughn implored him, while taking a quick look at one of his notes, within the very thin and compact device in his left hand. In this device, Vaughn had several pictures, including one of the badly burned and dismembered body of a woman, near the entrance of a sewer tunnel. They began attacking each other. Their voices seemed to be chanting. They made sign languages with their hands, and as they did, some kind of evil magic took shape. Clarence paused to take a breath. It killed everyone who was nearby, the police and the gypsies, those trying to flee, everyone. They all dropped to the ground as if they could not handle their own weight, as if a house had fallen on their backs. Blood, fire, bodies. All over. Everything happened so fast, no one had a chance. They couldn't even move. Clarence became quiet and Burton again asked him to continue speaking. He looked at Burton with tearful eyes. His body trembled and shivered as he held on to the left side of the bed with a very tight grip. His eyes closed shut and his mouth opened as if he wanted to yell out very loud, but his voice had disappeared inside him. Suddenly, Clarence remembered something. His eyes opened wide, immediately looking at Burton. Where's the little girl? Clarence asked. Little girl? Vaughn asked, looking puzzled. He looked at Clarence, while walking away towards the door, as he ordered it to open up. He exited the room in a hurry, while looking at the notes and fills in his thin black, U-shaped device. As he walked in the hallway, he placed a call through his wristband. Yes, Burton. A woman answered. Lennon. Have you come across the body of a little girl? Burton asked the woman. Negative. We have covered almost the entire godforsaken site, and we haven't found any more bodies. Lennon quickly replied, while observing an aerial view of a town engulfed in flames. The other team is trying to track down the sarcophagus, but we have not heard from them yet. The devil may have gotten away from us, yet again, Burton. Shit. Not again, Burton commented. Revisit the field again, he said to Lennon. And keep me posted if you find the little girl or anything else. Affirmative. Lennon understood the order. But, I doubt there's anything else to find here, Burton. We blew it. We blew it all up, almost the entire town. This is just a pile of fire, debris, and death. If the cops, the gypsies or the drug dealer did not make it out, what makes you think a little girl would have? Start another search. Just do it again, Burton said, before ending the communication. At the same time, what little girl are you talking about? Vaughn asked Clarence. At that moment, Burton entered the room again while reading the device in his hand. Vaughn looked at him, as Burton shook his head, saying no. The little girl that I carried through the sewer. Clarence replied. You went through a sewer? Burton said. Were you running away from the demons? He asked Clarence. Yes, Clarence said, sounding insecure about his own statement. I believe I was, he added. What was the little girl's name? Burton asked him. Her name. Clarence seemed puzzled by his thoughts. What was her name? Vaughn seemed to have been struggling with his emotions, and demanded a quick response from Clarence. He addressed him in an increasingly aggressive tone of voice. I don't remember. She was very little, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she was very scared. And suddenly, Vaughn got closer to Clarence and grabbed him by the collar of his hospital gown. "What's her goddamn name? What did she look like, and how did she end up with you? Give me something I can work with, goddammit." Burton ran to Clarence's aid and removed his partner away from his side, telling Vaughn to stay calm. "Speak. Speak now," Vaughn demanded. His loud voice prompted one of the doctors passing by to attempt to get near the door, but he was stopped by one of the armed guards posted outside. "Mr. Douglas, it is very important for you to tell us everything you know, and anything you can remember. At this point, anything you can give us may help us save lives. The lives of those others who are unaccounted for and who may still be out there in danger, including the little girl you just mentioned." Burton understood Clarence was in a tough predicament, but there was an impending need for information which was necessary to piece together the missing links in his investigation. I can't remember," Clarence told him. "Everything in my mind was blurry and disturbed." Burton then asked his agitated partner to leave the room. Vaughn walked out the door under the watchful eyes of some of the nurses, who happened to be walking outside. The door closed behind him. The agitated nature of his personality prompted him to conduct persistent researches, with the device in the palm of his hand. He did not notice Nurse Smith and another nurse walking past him. Nurse Smith looked at the door and saw a red light on the keypad, which indicated it was locked from the inside. She turned around and, slowly, followed Vaughn till they reached a quiet corner. She stared at him. He was analyzing visuals from a satellite feed. His eyes then rose up from his device and met Nurse Smith's eyes. They stared at one another briefly, neither one lowering their gaze. Vaughn. What drives a man to lose compassion for those of his own kind, who live in constant peril, especially under the circumstances where we find ourselves in? Nurse Smith asked Vaughn, speaking to him while looking away from his face. The same reason the gravely abandoned have landed into the tender care of the palm of your hands, nurse. Vaughn responded while placing his device inside his jacket pocket. If the question asked came from someone who has experienced. Vaughn continued. What the world out there has forced many others to confront, and without guarantee of success, then, to survive, it is not a question, but a misinterpreted perception of reality. The very ugliness of the reality which reached out and landed you here. My reality is vivid with hope. Nurse Smith instantly replied. What I have gone through will never tarnish the resolve I have found through the eyes of others. And hope is the reason I have rejected what my fate would have been, if I had accepted it the way it was supposed to be. This is why I will remain where my feet have driven me, where we both stand together at this moment. She paused and took a deep breath. I say this to remind you of what your duties and oath are based upon. Our oath. Vaughn replied sarcastically. This oath does not reflect upon you what has been forced upon me, Nurse Smith. Yes, we are both a part of this because of similar circumstances, but we are not looking at life through the same lenses. You should open your eyes to this reality. What reality? Nurse Smith asked. The reality that the world out there will not be for our children anymore. Vaughn replied. Whatever that remains of this world when it ends, it will not be for mankind. You are here due to that very reason. And the sooner your eyes are open to this reality, the better your sight will be and the better prepared you will become to help in the real fight at the end, when it arrives. Vaughn. Smith's voice was very low now. She looked at Vaughn, but at the same time, avoided his eyes. They say our eyes are the windows into the truth of our soul, Nurse Smith said. Vaughn stared at the nurse's face, feeling something strange, as he did. I agree with your statement, he said to Nurse Smith. She then continued. Indeed, the same circumstances landed us both where we are. In different ways perhaps. At the same time, it was your decision to make, when you were given the choice. You chose to serve the cause, fight, and help and do whatever it takes to keep the preservation of this world for those who will be here after we are gone. If we don't bring compassion to those who will land where we are now, and for the reasons we have, then it's just as if we are doing the devil's bidding. We may as well go out there and keep blowing it all up until we destroy the world ourselves, along with everyone in it. Nurse Smith's eyes now remained black deep within Vaughn's eyes. She was able to tell that his mind has traveled farther away from what she would have anticipated. She then walked away from him to continue with her duties. He looked in the other direction for an instant, and remained where he was, returning to the analysis of the information in his device. In the meantime, inside the room, his partner kept the strategic pressure on Clarence. Mr. Douglas, try to go back to the events. I need you to remember what happened. Burton took out a small silver container out of his jacket pocket while walking closer to Clarence. Start from the beginning. I will give you this pill. It is not medication, it is to relax your mind. I believe this will help you ease into the rest of your memories, and maybe in that way, you will be able to dig deeper in it and come up with more details about what happened and how you were able to survive. Maybe you can remember what happened to the little girl, and if she's still out there, we may be able to save her life. But I need you to tell me everything you can for us to be able to figure this out. It took a couple of minutes, but after the effects of the pill began to work, Clarence became more relaxed and began to feel numb to the pain. He again closed his eyes and went searching and looking into the deepest parts of his mind, and he then began telling his story to Burton based on the bits and pieces he was beginning to remember. I was just down on my luck, and Jeffrey was my last hope at that moment. Clarence began telling his story to Burton through the fragments which began to resurface slowly in his mind. Who's Jeffrey? Burton asked. Someone I knew back from Chicago. A good guy, always in search of what others weren't. Clarence explained, this time with a calmer tone of voice. And so, I followed him when he told me this trip could be the beginning of a new occupation for me. Something more adventurous and fulfilling. I needed something new in my life, an escape, and at this particular moment, I thought this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Everything seemed to be as he promised, and I felt it the moment we arrived at the shipyard of La Cruz, a small coastal town to the north of Costa Rica. I began to feel alive as soon as the ocean breeze flowed into my lungs. And then I saw her. She was everything any man could possibly want, and then some. I saw her talking to a man twice her age, whom she later told me was the main inspector of the local fishermen union. I was already getting off the small vessel that transported us to that part of the country. Jeff had told me that he met a man on the south side of Chicago, who told him that for the right price, he could put him in contact with one of the most powerful crime lords in charge of the drug smuggling and human trafficking businesses in the region. A man who also happened to be one of the most wanted criminals by the United States government. But it all turned out to be a plan, crafted by the drug lord himself. He wanted to tell his own side of the story, and wanted someone to have it revealed to the American people in the States. Jeff was obsessed with those types of stories. He told me that if he was ever going to win a Pulitzer, it would be due to a story like that, and he would not rest until he got the right one. The shipyard was very busy on that day. I don't know what she was doing talking to that inspector, but it seemed more like she was in control of everything that needed to happen. She later told me the inspector was a relative from the far side of her family. I didn't believe her, but I didn't care either. Everyone's got their own secrets, and I was no exception. Clarence looked at Burton in the eyes. I agree, Burton said to him. Please proceed, he told Clarence. I hung around as Jeff went to contact the person we needed to meet. Clarence continued. I kept the bag with my belongings close to me on the floor while some of the merchants traveling in the boat began to carry their things out. They all walked by, pushing me around and telling me to get out of the way. But I ignored them all. I wasn't going to move from where I was standing, and they didn't care if they pushed or shoved me. I could see how she gave the inspector an envelope, which to me seemed like some sort of payment. The inspector didn't even look inside the envelope and quickly stuffed it in his pants pocket while not taking his eyes away from her beautiful face, without appearing disrespectful. She looked like a goddess. Her hair was long and dark brown and at moments floated in the air, pushed by the sea breeze. Her eyes were the color of honey, her skin lightly tan, soft and shiny. Her lips were full and inviting, and as she spoke, she never allowed her smile to vanish. She was wearing very short denim shorts, which I believe she shortened herself, and a silky blouse that danced over her skinny waistline and her beautiful figure. I couldn't believe I was staring at such a perfect woman in this part of the world. whereas it was hard for me to even feel comfortable with the ones in my own country. I then saw her give a signal to 3 little boys who appeared to be waiting for her. They looked about 9 to 12 years old. They walked away from where they were, running playfully, and she then gave a tap kiss on the cheek to the man she was talking to before walking towards my direction. And as she did, the man she had been talking to immediately turned the other way, while rubbing his hair with both hands. As she walked closer to me, I swear I felt like doing the same and walk in her direction. Then, one of the merchants, carrying something heavier than what he was able to handle, pushed me from behind, and I stumbled against my own bag and dragged myself a few inches to the side, until I fell right in front of her feet. I almost caused her to fall as well, but I was able to catch her just in time. She smiled at me and said something in Spanish. Un poco descuidado. I believe she said I was a little clumsy or something like that. I was quickly back on my feet and told her that I was very sorry and pointed at the idiot who had pushed me. I quickly realized that I was still speaking in English to her and rapidly attempted to express it in her language, which I had learned somewhat on previous jobs. Her eyes gazed at me for a moment, and as she smiled, she asked me if I was a tourist from America. I answered yes, and she smiled even more. I noticed she looked around as if she was looking for someone, just before she continued talking to me. She asked me for my name. I told her my name was Clarence. Just before I asked for her name, she told me her name was Helena. She said her mother gave it to her and told her it was like a goddess's name or something like that. In my mind, I said she couldn't have been more right about that. She then asked me what I was doing in her country, and she told me she didn't see many young Americans around these parts anymore. Only old men looking for cheap sex and gambling thrills. I asked her if she fully understood words I was telling her in English, and she told me, in her very cute accent, that she spoke only a little, the few words that she had learned in school, because it was the second language of the country. She then asked me a few questions, and I don't know how or why, but in a matter of seconds I think I told her a partial version of my life story. And she kept smiling at me and actually trying to understand what I was telling her. I have always been a very shy person, but this woman was making me feel like I have never felt before in front of anyone. And I loved every second of it, and I wanted more. We had walked a few yards away from where we were before, and I found the courage to ask her if it was possible that she could make time to show me around, and she said yes. I was not expecting such a quick answer, but I definitely liked the one I got. Burton asked Clarence about the relevance of that woman with what had happened in the town, what he said he saw and experienced, and his present condition. She had everything to do with my condition, Mr. Burton. It was only because of going back for her that I ended up where I am, and in my present condition. Clarence then continued telling Burton his tale as the man sat with patience and took notes from time to time, applying the help of a device like Vaughn's, but thinner and wider. She told me that she would try to make time to show me some areas of her town, but not all. Clarence continued speaking. I told her that I wanted for her to show me everything, the good and the bad, the nice and the ugly. I told her I wanted to spend as much time as I could with her, that is if she was okay with that. She smiled while looking at the ground. At that moment the smile I was displaying parted from my face and I just stared at her, and I knew at that moment that, if she would ask me to stay with her, I was never going back to where I came from. Little did I know, my ominous story in that place was just beginning. But not only there, at the shipyard, where one of the boys who have been accompanying Helena came back for her. He had been hiding behind a corner, saw her talking to me, and for some reason, I don't believe that he liked what he saw us doing. No, it was not only that, but elsewhere, miles away from that part of town, where I strongly believe something dark and very sinister had been brewing, since before I was even set up by my destiny to end up where I had. Clarence closed his eyes and, slowly, everything began to come back from within the deepest parts of his mind. Burton listened attentively, as Clarence continued telling him his story, as best as he could recall. Burton also began placing other details together. Details that were unknown to Clarence, but were just unraveling at the same time his saga was beginning to take shape into words. At that moment, as Clarence told his story and Burton went through the secret files he had in his possession, the story took a life of its own, and everything began to unravel. Weeks earlier, it was a dark and cloudy night. "Mommy, help, help, please." The terrified crying of 7-year-old Laura awoke her mother, who was sleeping in a bed across the room. Her big brother David, who was 8, fell from the bed scared by the sudden sound of his sister crying hysterically. Their mother, Susan, was quick to get to her side. Susan embraced her little girl tightly and stroked her silky dark hair gently, to offer her some comfort. She attempted to console her, but Laura could not stop crying, nor erase the look of fear from her eyes. And now, to be continued. So Lisa, what do you think about the beginning of chapter 1?
Ozoria, I think it was great. I was not expecting it to shape into such a different story from the way in which you started it.
I know.
I would like to hear more of it, if you would like to continue.
You will. But for now, let us have some dinner, and we will continue with the story on the next episode. Agree?
Sounds good to me.
You got it.